If anyone has caused grief, he has not so much grieved me as he has grieved all of you to some extent. Not to put it too severely, the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient for him. Now, instead, you ought to forgive and comfort him, so that he will not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. I urge you, therefore, to reaffirm your love for him. That is 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Today, in this lesson, we will be looking at verse 7 and verse 6. And then we'll go through verse by verse in the next lessons. But I needed to put it in its full context, because if I just got up here and said, the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient for him. What? Who? I mean, you could make a really wild doctrine out of that standing by itself that would have nothing to do with what Paul's talking about. And that's worth thinking about. Let's think about what doctrines we could come up with out of the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient for him. Think about that. What could you do with that? You see, that's the problem with taking one verse out of context. Now, how many doctrines have you heard that somebody said, well, this or this, well, give me book, chapter, and verse on that? No, they didn't say book, chapter, and verses. They said verse. And how many doctrines are built on one verse? You have one group that's going around saying, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved, and he that believeth not shall be damned. Okay? And another verse is going around says, and they're saying, if you believe in your heart, if you say with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and if you believe with your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. One verse. That settles it. I know somebody who used to get up in church and say, period, at the end of it. That settles it. Well, actually, there's no period in the Greek, by the way. There are no periods in anything in the Greek, by the way. And I could come up with some other verses on the same subject that you could also take right out of context. What about the one farther along in James? So we see that Abraham was justified by his works. By the way, I just bumped into a very fascinating set of YouTube videos by somebody who is staunchly saying that the salvation by faith is totally wrong, because, and he's got his one verse for it. He's some kind of heavy-duty old Roman church person. His avowed intention is to destroy the Protestant Reformation. Okay. One verse. So we have to do these in context. So that's what I'm doing today, in context. Let's get back onto the actual verse in context. The punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient to him. What is he talking about? I think it is very clear, whether there was an intervening letter or not, that this is talking about the events in 1 Corinthians 5. Go read it yourself. If I read that, we will be out of time. We're almost out of time already. But there was a man who was involved in a gross sin that he may have not even understood that it was sin. We go, everybody knows, but in the context that the Christian doctrine was turning the world upside down, okay, and he's in a different culture that we grew up in, and then he's in a brand new cult, as it is called, the Christians, that is turning everything on its head, that he may have said, well, we have freedom in Christ, and because this and because that. Whatever the reason, he was doing it, and it was way out of line. And the church was just letting it happen. And Paul got all over their case. And now there's a couple things here. He says, number one, the punishment was sufficient. The punishment of throwing him out of the church, having nothing to do with him, giving him the cold shoulder, acting as if he were just one of those Roman soldiers, somehow brought him to his spiritual senses. It was sufficient. It did your job. Second thing, look, it says by the majority. There are some who try to subvert church discipline by saying that it must be unanimous. So if they can get one or two people to say, well, we don't think that he should be thrown out of the church for that, then you can't do church discipline. So he says the majority. There are others that subvert it in the other direction, saying that we have to do church discipline, even though the majority of the church says this is not appropriate. Now, there are times when the majority is wrong. And right at the moment, I'm dealing with the issue of that has a lot to do with why I'm not at this church and at this church. Because there's a limit to how far I can go with just the, well, we'll just accept this, we'll accept this, we'll accept this. We can't do anything about that. There's a limit to it because it associates me with that to a degree that is inappropriate. But what he is saying is, and we're out of time, the church discipline was done. It's a good thing it was done, and it had its effect. I've seen that happen. I've seen it effective, and I've seen people turn away from it. But I have seen it work. And here he says it worked, and that's a good thing. Church discipline, properly applied, is a good thing.